Welcome to the panel talk on the topic of can today's porn lead to our sexual freedom? And first of all, I would like to introduce to you the lovely guests that we have today. The first person is Paulita Pappel. You might all know her. Wherever you want. Paulita Pappel is a Berlin-based filmmaker and feminist pornographer. She works as a producer, a director, and intimacy coordinator. She's an advocate for a sex-positive and consent-based culture. She's the co-founder of Lustery and Hardwerk, a production company for ethical and feminist gangbang pornography. Gangbang. Yes. Since 2013, she's the curator for the Porn Film Festival, which is, you all know, happening right now from the 26th till the 31st of October. And I hope you've all seen some films already, or you've booked your ticket. The Berlin Porn Film Festival is an alternative independent film festival that focuses on sexuality, politics, feminism, and gender issues, and is the only festival of its kind in Germany. And although not only men, do you want to?
No, I just realized not anymore. There's more and more porn film festivals popping all around the world and also around Germany, so that's good news. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, and although this event today is not part of the Porn Film Festival, we're huge fans and very excited to have you here today. Thank you. The next person I would like to welcome on stage is Esluna Love. Esluna started her career as an alternative model about 2 years ago, and for over 6 months she's now working as a full-time model, a porn performer and creator from the Netherlands. She works for diverse productions all over Europe, and to her it is important that she can express herself in a sexual and sensual and creative way, discovering different sides of herself throughout that process. She calls herself Online Fantasy Girl, and we're so happy to have you here today. So the next person I want to welcome on stage is Madita Oeming. Madita is an independent porn scholar. She graduated with her master's thesis, Moby's Dick, from the University of Göttingen, and is now pursuing her PhD project on porn addiction, America's moral panic of the digital age. Striving to change the public conversation about porn, Madita actively communicates her work to audiences outside outside of academia. She has written for Missy magazine and Vice Germany, has done multiple interviews with German and US media outlets, and is an avid Twitter user. Madita actually was a jury member for the 2019 Porn Film Festival here in Berlin, and she strongly believes in building bridges to fight stigma. Thank you so much for being here. Now, last but not least, I want to welcome Popo Fan on the stage. So he was born in China and is now based in Berlin. His activist documentaries featuring queer families have made a notable impact on Chinese society. And from 2016, he started to make sex-positive fiction shorts. His film, The Hutong Vibe, won special mention at Cine King, New York City in 2017. Despite the varied formats and content of his projects, Popo believes that film should remain a space of free expression, and porn is the future of this philosophy. His artistic practice to achieve that also includes writing and film curating. So thank you so much for being here. Down. So to start, I just wanted to give a short intro on the topic. 75% of porn consumers, about 75%, identify as male, and that has nothing to do with men being hornier than women or any other gender. And a lot of that has to do with a lack of representation. We still live in a patriarchal society, and the porn world is not exempt from that. In mainstream porn, male fantasies are highly represented, whereas the fantasies of queer, female, non-binary, trans, people of color, and so many more are either fetishized or underrepresented. Fortunately, there are porn producers, creators, and performers and scholars out there who are trying to change that. We feel so much shame around the body, sexuality, and porn, of course, that we don't seem to be able to talk about porn and sex with curiosity and openness. Porn sites have more visitors in a month than Netflix, Amazon, and Twitter altogether, so it clearly is a topic of interest. We are taking the current Porn Film Festival as an opportunity to have that conversation, to talk about porn, specifically whether today's porn can lead to our sexual freedom. So I would like to start with the first question. What does sexually free even mean to you? Maybe, Paulita, do you want to start?
Oh, you're going to start with me? I wasn't ready, but I'll just go with the flow. Thank you. Thank you for this introduction. It's very nice to be here with all of you. I guess most of us, or a lot of us, know each other, but a lot of you, I don't know. May I, I know this is annoying, but may I ask a question to the audience, just so that we all get to know each other a little bit better?
Yeah,
is that okay?
course,
but then I promise I will answer your question. Okay, so how many of you have done porn before? Please raise your hands. Yes. Wonderful. How many of you have watched porn before? Now we're talking. All right. How many of you have a CHEEX subscription? Look at you. Well done there. Any more questions? You have some? Okay. Oh, how many of you went to the Porn Film Festival, watch a film? Yes, very well done there. Okay, wonderful. Thank you. Now I feel like we're more acquainted. Sexual freedom, that's a really good question. Personally, I would define sexual freedom as a society where there is space for everyone to thrive in their own following their own interests and sexual explorations and journeys without being judged, without being discriminated against, and having access to resources that are inclusive and informative and that allow each person to find what they want to do. That's how I would describe it.
Do you agree, Madita?
Yep. Maybe I would add, because you talked a lot about not being shamed or being judged, so people looking at you from the outside, but I think it's also a lot about allowing myself to like whatever I like and to let my body respond and to be open towards whatever comes to me as something that I'm into and that may surprise me, and that's something that I'm still sort of working on, because you keep having those moments where you're like, that's really hot, but I don't want to find this hot. Like, this is not in line with whatever my politics are or what I think I should be into. So I think allowing myself pleasures of all types is what I think of when I think about sexual freedom.
So a shame-freeness around your sexual interests. And would you say that your work, your type of work, contributes to your own sexual freedom?
Most definitely, especially in that it allowed me to talk about it more in public spaces like this one, but also inside the university, inside the classroom, on conferences. Like, it's a way to be up on a panel, on an academic panel, and talk about sex and porn. Obviously, I'm not talking about my own, like, I don't know, sexual preferences at an academic conference, but to some extent it's always there too, and it's always also about myself, and it made it very easy for me to open up certain spaces for this topic, and also on Twitter or Instagram, like, where other people, unfortunately, are being shadow banned and deleted because they're sex workers. I still count as sort of an educator, so up until now I've been lucky that my content has not been removed, so that's a kind of freedom as well. And yeah, just talking about it is automatically killing the shame to a certain extent. Just standing on a stage and saying, I watch porn and I masturbate to it, it's really freeing.
Yeah.
Yeah, give me a big applause for that one. Woo!
What about you, Popo Fan?
Of course, when you think about freedom for someone from a country like China, we have to deal a lot with censorship. You know, it's different page compared with anywhere else almost. But in my life, I have to deal so much, not only porn, but also being queer and featuring about films and dealing with this topic already such a taboo. So, but on the other hand, I think very important also we need to emphasize another key word, which is pleasure, because freedom should and will and usually also bring us pleasure. So and pleasure should have its own free shape, and no matter it's with a stranger, with your lover, with your partner, and it's very very important. And I have another the third keyword, but my brain suddenly blank out. So maybe go to other analysts.
Yeah. Esluna, do you want to add
Yeah,
something?
for me as a porn performer, freedom for me is really important. From a young age, it's really important for me. I am a dancer from nature, so I did a dance academy. So freedom of your body and expressing yourself was something that I was always searching and always finding on stage, and that felt so good, that freedom. And now I have, when I'm on a really safe porn set and everyone is really respectful of each other, I find sexual freedom on the set with other people, in front of the cameras, in front of all the crew, and also when I create my own videos. It's also so free for me because I'm in control. I'm in control of what I want to show. I'm in control of my sexual freedom. So yeah, the last period of my life, I am so free, but on social media, I'm so censored. So that's really frustrating to feel really free on one side, but you want to promote yourself as a performer, as a model, as a content creator, and you're getting really censored. And you try, and a lot of people try to get it out there, but still, it's so difficult. Yeah. But it's a really important topic because everyone deserves to feel free in different ways.
Yeah, I mean, there would be, or I would say a popular voice would be if anyone would feel free sexually in terms of have no shame for whatever they fantasize about or desire, then that would lead, I mean, this is the typical example, that would lead to pedophilia being okay, for example, or teen pornography or any of that. Can you maybe try and describe the difference a little bit between the sexual freedom and such a... Yeah, Madita, please.
Before you even asked that question, I meant to add that, of course, everything that we're saying needs to happen within the boundaries of consent. And I think that's the major difference, because a child cannot give consent, a drunk person cannot give consent, an animal cannot give consent to a human being. So things that are illegal for a reason would not fall into everything we just said about pleasure and desires, because it's not consensual in and of itself.
Yeah. Do you have anything to add, or?
Actually, I just realized my third keyword. I want to say empowering is very important. It's freedom is to empower people, and I totally agree with you when you say you dare to say the word I masturbate, I watch porn. Sometimes in a lot of places very difficult, and also in certain social environment, also and certain group of people. For example, now also I hope the industry also gain more awareness about the way how do they portray Asian body, and the desire of Asian body of Asian men, also how Asian woman with stereotypes in the industry, and those topics need to be talked. And so the freedom is also to empower different diverse of performers and diverse of body in the industry.
Yeah, thank you. Do you all, because some people, of course, they work in a certain type of environment and then they don't want to see that in their private time. Do you all watch porn for pleasure? A nod, no. You don't?
No, not anymore.
Why?
Yeah. Since I started doing a lot of porn shoots, my life is like mostly about sex, and that's really fun. But for me, most pleasure is when I have intimate sex with my partner without looking at porn. Or I can still watch porn and really enjoy porn, but I'm also then looking at, oh, how is the lighting? Oh, how what do they wear? How is their performing? You know, so I'm analyzing everything, and it happens automatically. Yeah, but I also, when I watch, I get a lot of inspiration, like, oh my God, that's so good. Oh my God, that's so hot. But I'm not like,
Yeah.
no.
Yeah. What about you, Paulita?
It's really funny. I never watched porn before. I grew. That's a big non-secret about me. I was always fascinated about porn. I was fascinated about the idea of porn. Porn, I think for me, even without understanding what it meant, I felt that porn, there was something very disruptive in porn, because it was something that you couldn't talk about in openly and so on. So for me, the idea of porn and the idea of sex as a performative act was very interesting. And that's why I started doing porn myself also as a performer, but I never watched it. And then since I started watching porn as a curator for the Porn Film Festival, as a producer, as a content curator, and so on and so forth, like I watch so much porn, but not privately, but for work. Although in my life, work and private is not really something that really has a very clear defined line. I wanted to say something else. What I most enjoy, and this is something that is both work and private, because there's blurry lines, is watching porn together with a lot of people in a room. I think for me that's something like it's a very liberating experience, and it doesn't necessarily have to do with like a physical that I'm turned on sexually, that I feel horny. It's more there's something. It's sexual in another way. It's sexually liberating for me in a way that it's not about like having sex or experiencing like an orgasm, but it's elevating me somehow. So that's maybe a way of watching porn that I really enjoy.
Yeah, and the idea maybe also of it not necessarily needing to arouse you, but just appreciating the film or the art, or getting inspiration, as you said, or yeah. Would you say that porn has changed a lot within the last decade, let's say, in terms of liberation and becoming more sexual free, or different forms of sexuality being more represented, maybe? Do you want to say something to that, Paulita?
Yeah, sure. I think that's a very loaded question, to be honest. That's the way I feel it. Because I think it implies somehow that porn was not diverse and not good in a way, and that I know that you don't want to say it, but it's the question that every journalist makes. You know what I mean? So I think it's great that you're saying this question. Thank you so much. But I think it's important that we talk about this question because this idea of like porn being like a homogeneous thing that looks the same, and then like in the last 10 years suddenly people doing alternative porn and having, you know, reinventing it, I think it's very problematic because porn has always been very diverse. Like if we go back to the stack films in the 20s, there was a lot of amateur porn, you know, with many different, representing different bodies and different sexualities actually, which is really fascinating, and we never talked about that. And then if we go to the golden age of porn and like porno chic and huge productions, you know, running in the cinemas, there was also a lot of things going on there. There was a lot of like queer, you know, mostly maybe male gay, but porn in the 70s and 80s throughout the AIDS crisis, and so on and so forth. Like I could say so much, and I think that all needs to be honored. We need to acknowledge that that is our history, and there's so much there, and porn has been so much more diverse and inclusive than most mainstream media, especially, and I think that is important to say. So that being acknowledged, I would say, of course, with the internet and with like the technology being available, like everyone has a phone and can do porn. So it's, of course, that has changed, and that has changed a lot the way people, the amount of porn that is there, and how easy people can make porn. I think that's super interesting. Yeah, and I think what the change that maybe if I just go back to my position as curator of the Porn Film Festival, a really big change that I've seen is that a lot of, like, for example, there's some like long feature formats that have sexual explicit scenes or that deal very aggressively maybe with sexuality. These were films that before, like 10 years ago, it was like very independent, no budget, no distribution. Like the director would come and be like, can you please show my film so somebody sees it? And nowadays there's way more films having sexually explicit scenes, dealing with sexuality. They're having bigger budgets, they're getting money to be done, they're becoming distribution. So that's a change, and I think that's very interesting. And I'm gonna pass on over because I know my friends here also have a lot to say. Please.
It's tough to add to this dense history lesson. Thank you for that. Maybe just one thing that always comes to mind when we talk about changes over time, and I think that's not just true for porn, but also when we talk about, you know, how did opinion making change, how did journalism change? Like there's always this boomer take of everything used to be good, and then social media came and now everything's bad. Like everybody used to love their body, and now we have all this body shaming around because of social media. And I think that there's a parallel between looking at porn and looking at social media as elements of like the digital age and how it has changed our world for the worse if you ask people of a certain generation. And that's a dangerous narrative because overall I think it's more about visibility. Like we see more things, and that's in a good way and in a bad way. We see more queer people, people of color, marginalized people, marginalized desires, but we also see more right-wing idiots and people who think that we made up COVID. So that's, I think, similar with porn. Like it has always been around, but it's more visible now. So because there are other platforms, it's easier to distribute. So like Erika Lust did not invent feminist porn or the label of feminist porn, but gave it a lot of visibility, which turned it into more of a, public buzzword. And but I think it's really important to understand that there is this history and that this history is often made invisible by talking about it in a certain way. So I appreciate that.
Yeah, for sure.
Since I'm not in the business for a long time, or I'm not sure if I'm in the business, so I can only talk about my personal experiments. So I do watch porn, and one of the single person in Nikon and jerking off before going to sleep and with CHEEX. Thanks. I also have the content, but I watch different. But there are different reasons what I watch porn for personal pleasure. I would say I develop on one hand with this porn on internet or with real porn where you can see, but I think me myself also create this porn in my mind, which is 3D and 4D or whatever, and I was imagining some of my partners and what is going on with us. Sometimes also tell them and create this poetic moment, so I can identify them also a method of porn. And the second reason is that sometimes I also had to watch because of professional reasons, but sometimes it turned to be private reason. And I was following many OnlyFans vloggers, so to discover potential collaborators. So that's sometimes is the case. But regarding the change of these years, I can only share my feeling about. I think it's a very complicated, fascinating process the last many years. And firstly, so as I said, for a very long time, the only way for if you are a gay man, you can only live in China and you can only do illegal download of American mainstream gay porn with all white muscle bodies, but then later of course I discovered more possibilities, and especially with platforms such like Porn Film Festival Berlin gave me such a big open eyes open experience. And also after I worked with my first film with Erica Lust, and I also wrote article on why is China and also being widespread in China, and I was surprised also how many followers they have in China too. And those are the phenomena we should not ignore, that actually people do have more willing on diversify their access to porn, but at the same time, and you can see censorship everywhere, almost everywhere, has going tighter and tighter. And actually, my column on Vice has to stop just a few months ago because of the authority targeting feminism. So they visited my editor and saying, you have porn and feminism topics on your site. And on the other hand, even in Europe and here, my Vimeo account was attacked, and 4 of my videos are deleted on Vimeo. And they wrote me email saying, we identify that your video are pornography, are not art. If you want to argue that you have your curation in the video, you can write to us to prove it. When I was thinking about that, maybe I should ask Pauline or some of my film festival colleagues to write me some letter. But then suddenly I feel make me feel so shitty. Why I have to prove that I'm doing art, not doing porn? But what's wrong with making porn? And why? Who can tell? Who can identify the boundary between porn and art? And thank you. And isn't it also possible to combine porn and art? Why we have to split them in such a clear border? So this is also fascinating for me, and here such a big topic for me that has porn bring sexual freedom.
Yeah, thank you. That was very well said.
I don't want to talk after that, actually. But just on this super tiresome conversation of the line between art and porn, which is my personal pet peeve. It's driving me insane, because I truly believe is literally just art is something that we give social value to in our culture, and sex is something that we don't give any social or cultural value to. And that's the line. That's why we draw it. And that's how you can give value to something by saying it has, aesthetic pleasures. cinematically valuable, it has any kind of value, and that's in a lot of definitions of pornography. It says, like, if it is catering to other pleasures than sexual pleasures, it's not porn, then it's okay. It doesn't have to be censored. And that's such a big fuck up of our culture that I don't know how to reverse, but I believe that's the core of that, and that's annoying. So yeah, super important point. And what else did I want to say? Oh, right, talking about the changes of porn, I think it's also important to talk about all the non-changes. Like, it's an incredibly uncreative industry in a certain way. Like, if you just think of, like, the cum shot, for example, like, centuries of sperm being presented in, like, exactly the same way and exactly the same time. Like, it's not a creative choice to do it like that. And there's a lot of, as long as people buy it, as long as it's selling, we're gonna keep doing it. You know, like now, a lot of people watch incest porn, so everybody's doing incest porn. And it's just like, you know, going for it as long as it sells. And that's, I think, very interesting about porn. It's so repetitive. And especially with all the, like, anxieties in the media around, you know, everybody is looking for more extreme stuff. Like, everything needs to be more extreme. And then you look at porn and you're like, it's literally the same for 50 years. Like, and I think that's very interesting about porn, the non-changes.
Yeah, for sure.
And I think it's very important to add to that, that one of the reasons it's because there's no funding for porn, and there's no ways of properly having a fair distribution methods. Like, if we had a fair playground for producing and distributing porn, and we had ideally also access to funding, to state funding, or whatever other kind of funding, investors or whatever, like, then we would be able to create different things that we wouldn't have to follow this, like, okay, this sells, I need to create this really, really cheap and sell it so I can keep producing really, really cheap and a lot of it so I can, you know, it's like, it's a wheel. But I think we need to disrupt that, and like, now is the time, and we need to make a lobby, and we need to change the laws. You know, exactly. We need to change the law so that pornography and art is not considered differently and pornography is not censored. And we need to allow for other people to create other stuff, not just after this selling formula.
And in order for that to be possible, we all need to pay for our porn.
Yes. Yes.
Esluna, how do you, as a performer, experience, well, sexual freedom in, like, right now in porn? You've already said that you feel very sexually freed yourself when you shoot porn. Do you have that experience generally with when you talk to other performers, or?
Yes, definitely. And I learned so much about my own sexuality when I started with porn, especially because I, as a performer, was in a lot of safe spaces. And unfortunately, not for all the performers, that is a fact. So that's also a really bad thing, and it still is happening. So yeah, but because we always had a performer talk and always talked about our boundaries, I experimented with things, and that made me feel more free as a person, but also in a sexual way and in a mentally way, because I learned so much. Yeah.
It's very interesting to hear how, on one hand, yeah, there is so much, because of the internet, of course, as well, there's so much more content now and so much more diversity on one hand, but also so many more restrictions on the other hand, like you've all basically said now. I think this is a very interesting contradiction in the question of, can today's porn lead to our sexual freedom? Because, yeah, it really goes both ways. Do you feel generally just asking the question itself now, do you think that today's porn can lead to our sexual freedom? I mean, this is a very complex question and maybe a little bit too easy, but I still want to ask that.
Can I try? I'll try it. I don't have an answer. I'm just going to rant a little bit, if that's okay. I think there's like never one thing would lead to sexual freedom. Like I think obviously porn can, it's the same way that, you know, porn should not be the source of education. The same way only porn cannot lead to everyone's sexual freedom. I don't think so. I think it's a societal change, cultural change that needs to happen. And I think porn can play a really big part in it, and I think it is already playing a big part in it. But I think there needs to happen like a change of the way we talk about sexuality, the way sexuality is taught in schools, it's talked about in press and media and in whatever other social situation, like that needs to change as well. Like the resources in terms of information and not only information, but also the technology, science, like all of this needs to follow. I think this is very important, yeah.
Yeah, because when you said like the sexual information part, when I was younger and I was in school, I got like when I was 12, I think, or maybe a little bit older, I got like my first sexual information from school, and it was only hetero-based. And also, there was nothing about the pleasure for a woman. There was nothing about pleasure for your body, for the whole person that's you know? So I think indeed what Paulita said, it already starts there. That's the base, and then you can build further, yeah.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Like education, 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 that's where it starts, because that's where we already learn so much bullshit about sex. Like there's so many narratives about gender stereotypes, about what sex is supposed to be, about how dangerous sex is. We learn about how do I not get pregnant, how do I not get STIs, how do I not, it's all about dangers, it's
how do I not get raped?
Exactly. And that absolutely needs to change. And of course there's also like a gender division, how much you learn. Like there's one school book in Germany that actually shows the full anatomy of the clitoris that brings sexual pleasure to so many people. And we're all able to draw a dick when we're like 5. So that's a problem. But I agree that porn can be an important tool, but there's so many restrictions around it, and as long as it's bound up in a patriarchal system, and at the end of the day, that's like, it's the patriarchy and capitalism that is keeping us all in these, that's keeping us unsatisfied with our bodies, which of course is also a big part of it. Like if we can't feel okay with our bodies, it's very hard to be sexually free. That's a prerequisite to enjoy your body. But as long as we're being sold products that tell us what's wrong about our body and keep making us buy stuff in order to feel pretty, and that's how capitalism works, this is not going to change. And I think there are a lot of restrictions and boundaries to porn to being an effective tool to that. As you can see, I mean, straight men have been looking at porn for decades and centuries. They always had access to porn more than any other group. And they're still not over like having their assholes touched. You know, like they're still so caught up in ideas of masculinity bound to sexual practices because it has not been broken in porn. You know, there's this rule of, you know, like there can't be bisexual interaction in a straight threesome, for example, if there are 2 men. And why does that not change? Because we're still bound up in these gender stereotypes of what straight male sexuality is supposed to look like, and that's why they're not changing. So I think it's much more complex than that. We can't just throw porn at the world and everyone's going to be free.
Yeah.
I think the answer for me is yes.
I was hoping you would be like, yes.
I think at least yes to my own sexuality and sexual freedom. So when I told people that, told when my friend heard that I'm starting doing porn, actually when I was in Beijing, I was already, everybody told me, you should move to Berlin. And after I moved to Berlin and they heard that I'm doing porn, they was like, we are so glad all your dirty jokes has a home now. You don't need to crash all my dinner party and we end up everybody's talking about sex. The result is that after I do porn, and so sometimes I still go to their dinner party, and I said, "What do you do? What a filmmaker? So what kind of film do you do?" Recently, we're doing porn. So, really? And then the whole night we are talking about the porn. So she would say, "Okay, you're still occupying my dinner party," but I think this for me personally is so important, and because also growing up in a very patriarchal society and also dominated by monogamy, and not only monogamy but also you have to get married, having children, and you know, my own coming out process was also quite long progress already, and being a porn filmmaker also gives a statement about, okay, I am not going to following that rule that you want me to do. So this also make me again very empowering, and being I don't know if I should use the word slut. And already portray this image to other people that, okay, I'm not going to follow your way. So I think certainly for me, personally, brought me sexual freedom.
Thank you.
Yes, lads.
Also coming back onto the question of sexual education, how would you... Does any of you have children? No? No. How would you introduce pornography specifically into your children's lives? Esluna, do you want to start?
Yeah, it's a good one. I never thought about having children until now. No, I'm joking. My partner's like... when I think back, I would just remember my own parents. They were always very open, and we talked about sex during dinner. And I always could ask them everything. But now, when I go back about that experience, they were together for a very long time, marriage. They were their first, relationship. So they could not tell me everything. So they had another experience than I have right now. So of course I will do it differently. But for me, it already starts when your child, I will always say, be whoever you want to be, make your own identity. That's the most important thing. And if you have questions about sex and sexuality, just ask them. I'm here for you. I cannot give you a straight answer how I will do it, because I think it will go in the moment. But yeah, I will always give them the freedom to explore their own sexuality in a safe space, of course. Yeah, because that's really important. Not to add like a label on someone, you need to be this and you need to do that.
Yeah, I think that makes so much sense. Just like, being like allowing for someone to explore who they are and not, giving that space and giving. So that, I think that's beautiful. Thank you. I'm gonna write that down now. I think it's about, it's tough because we don't have scripts on how to talk to our children. So we really need to figure this out by ourselves. But then it's interesting you talk about your parents being open, because my parents were also very open, and they grew up in a Catholic dictature. So they also did not have a script on how to even talk about anything related to bodies and sexuality, you know? So I feel like they already did so much work in that way. So I'm trying to now, like, you know, they made such a big step, and I'm thinking, okay, maybe this is the other next step that we need to take now. And I think it's only about trying to find appropriate terms that are altersgerecht, what's the word? Age appropriate, okay, thank you. So finding age appropriate terms to talk about pornography the same way that you would talk about some other films or some other stuff that is not for children yet, that this is something that adults do. And you know, when you're older, maybe you'll like it or not. And you know, try to find, for depending on the age of your child, like allowing them to know there is that thing. But waiting, as you were saying, for them also maybe to come to you with their questions. So no imposing them anything, but always having an open door, and never letting them feel that they are never gonna be punished or in any way if they would come up with a question, or if they would have watched something or so on, because then you're always opening up a door, so they're not left alone with whatever they encounter.
I think the last part is really important, because I think just as important as openness and open-mindedness is also boundaries. Like, these are still your parents, they are not in your peer group, you don't want to necessarily know all about your parents' sexuality and preferences, and it's really important to keep up certain boundaries with your child and to let your child decide what they want to know, to ask questions, to not challenge them too much with too much information. So I think like open door policy in terms of making clear that you're available for questions, and just maybe giving your child an idea of it's okay to feel disgusted by this, it's okay to feel aroused by this, whatever response you have to this is super individual, this is about you. If your friends like something, it doesn't mean that you have to like something, because a lot of young kids come across porn for the first time because it's, you know, in some WhatsApp group or somebody shows something to them, and there's a lot of peer pressure in these groups. But in general, I think porn doesn't have to be this very difficult other topic, because all of these are things that you should teach your kids anyways. Like, you know, like stand up to your peers if this is something that you don't want, be clear about your boundaries, feel free to be who you are. These are important lessons regardless of whether we're talking about sex or not. So I think, and that's what also like most of the studies show, that if kids have a certain approach to life, they have a certain approach to porn. Like, they are very well able to handle this kind of medium, to understand that it's fiction, if they also learned this about other parts in life, and if they have a good relationship to their parents and know they can come to them with any kind of trouble, then this is gonna be one of them. So I think we should also stop making it something extraordinary and extra hard all the time, and just talk about it. Like, I think we should, in film studies, always talk about porn. Like, it's one genre of movies, let's just talk about it, and let's not have, you know, porn studies. It's like this extra thing where we talk about that other thing, and it's really dangerous, and you will never get funding for it. So, yeah, but that's of course a big question.
I'm not planning to have children, but for the next generation, because I have 3 nieces, and I remember when I was in school, and my sister is the first person to have a computer computer in our family. So I always use her computer if I go back home for Spring Chinese New Year or summer holiday. So I figured out there was someone use her computer to read some Japanese boys love manga, and for you, some of you might know the term of fujushi. So young girls love reading gay love story. But that was definitely not me. And a few years later, my niece come to Beijing to do her internship, and then we suddenly have this coming out moment to each other, and I figured out it was her. And so when she was, but that was. She told me that she has been reading this kind of manga since when she was 13, 14 years old, and some of those could also contain erotic or let's say pornography contents. And but then we had I didn't expect this coming out moment to be at the moment we were eating Peking duck in a restaurant. And secondly, her question was directly, so uncle, are you top or bottom? And you didn't expect her first question also this. And I was saying, darling, I'm beyond that. And she said, no way, in the Japanese manga world, you have to be either top or bottom. And okay, we are going to have a proper sexual education now. So I taught her different term, and also we started also talking about her own sexuality and what is her exploring has been. So this also opened a door for me, and with the next generation. Of course, my sister, she's I think she was very open-minded, but she hasn't touched topics like that. And sexual education in China is actually nothing. And but I was glad with media, at least no matter how stereotyped it was, at least it brought this topic into our mind. So that's why I think pornography can at least raise this awareness and build up this communication. And with that communication, there is more and more possibility.
Thank you. That's really nice to hear, because I actually think that a lot of, well, even people that think of themselves as very open sexually, that this sexual education with children or the next generation is still then one more step that you have to take, which which scares a lot of people, or where you think you have to be very aware of how you approach it or whatever. So I also think what you said, or even your story as well, is so nice to hear, that children are also just people. You can talk about things with them and let them come to you, and so thank you.
If I could just add one thing, because I think if I could change like one narrative about children and sexuality, is that we stop thinking like when you're 18 there's this switch and that's when you start being a sexual being, like, because this is how we talk about this. Like, a lot of children start masturbating really early, and like, you know, I talk to parents sometimes and they're like, my 2 years old is having an erection, I don't know how to deal with it. People feel so insecure around child sexuality, which is understandable because we think of a lot of violence and a lot of things that are happening, but then we don't tackle that violence, you know? It's as usual, we're not actually tackling the problem because it's too hard to do, but at the same time, we're not able to give any freedom because we're so afraid of this big danger of, you know, pedophilia and hurting children and crossing their boundaries. And by doing that, we're actually not enabling them to defend and express their own boundaries, and are only doing harm to them, like not teaching them the right words for the genitalia, for example. That's harmful. Like, children need to be able to name every part of their body. That's important. And I think it's a long road ahead of us to change that. And parents are very, very nervous around that topic, and I get that because that's what our culture teaches us, but that's not true. And talking about it again will change. Like, if we all talk about how we masturbated when we were 12 with our whatever, I don't want to get too personal. You all have your own stories. And I think that's at some point that's necessary to understand. Sorry, I'm getting angry.
Were you going to say pillow? Was it a pillow?
No. It was some kind of animal. But that's gonna stay between the two of us.
And a pillow.
What are your desires or wishes for porn? Well, maybe for the porn that you do or research yourself, or in general for the future, to round this off.
That it's a safe place for everyone. Really short.
But a big one.
I might be repeating myself, but it bears repeating. It's good that we say it 1,000 times, or I like to say it 1,000 times. I think porn needs to be decriminalized fully, which means, as we've said, porn is just another film genre. It doesn't need different legislations. It doesn't need different ways of distribution. It doesn't need all of these. We need to lobby, and now is the time, and we all need to get together and get solidarity. Content creators, platforms, producers, scholars, everyone. We all need to get together and talk to each other and have strong networks. So great that we're all here today, you know, because we need to make very clear that it's old school. The laws that we are being ruled by are old school in terms of sexuality and how we're tackling pornography. We need to get rid of that, and we need to apply the same rules that we apply for film. There is restrictions in what films can show and cannot be shown, and what is age appropriate and what is not. If we dare to go there, there's so much potential that we could discover. So yeah, let's start treating porn as just another film genre. And that means having access to distribution, having access to funding, and having, access to, again, creating fair and great standards and elevating this industry.
And maybe just adding to that, it's not just about the genre, like the final product, but also let's talk about, let's take sex work as work. Like, let's give sex workers the rights that we want for every kind of work, and because that's also a major part of destigmatizing the whole industry, bringing communities together, like have sex workers around on panels at universities, in the media, don't leave out their voices. There's still so much talk about sex work without sex workers, and that absolutely needs to change in order to erase all those lines and erase the stigma. And I think the big other side is the consumer side, where my wish is that we walk away from the shame, that we're more open-minded to our own desires. As I said in the beginning, allow ourselves to watch, to enjoy, to discover, to explore, and get away from these preconceived notions of, I am this kind of person, so I'm supposed to be into that, and just explore. And that's what I wish for the future of porn.
My wish is still regarding to diversity. I hope the future of the porn will be more diverse but not limited to age, racial, body shape, gender, sexuality, and so on. And the short-term action I want to do is that recently also a few coming projects about showing on screen of desirable Asian male body with desires. So I hope this will empower my community.
Thank you. So thank you so much for being here. As the last question before we would open then the questions to the audience in a minute, I just have one last very quick question. What is the first porn you've ever watched?
I think it was an animation, and it was some kind of manga hentai stuff with an octopus.
No, that is nice.
Don't spoil too much. Yeah. Cool.
I don't really remember. Like, I remember watching porn in Canal Plus. That was like this station that you had to pay. Like, you're nodding. You remember this one? Yes, you're from Spain. Ah, there we go. So after 11, like Fridays after 11, if your parents paid for it, you could watch porn. But if you didn't pay for, or if your parents didn't pay for it, it would go like blurry. So it was like, so you could like kind of see what was going on, but like not really see what was going on. So I remember watching with like friends and being like, oh, what is that? And, like, not really. Yeah, but no, but I'm not sure actually.
I'm not sure either, but I believe one of my earliest confrontations with porn was on rotten.com. I don't know if you remember that site. But I remember women being fucked by donkeys, and that left an impression too. But it was, I think, it's a very common denominator of the first porn encounter is this is very exciting and this is very disturbing and I don't know what to do with this. And that's how I felt.
Interesting question also, how to identify porn. But I do remember when I come out to my mom and we talk about, that was almost the first time we talked about sex. And she asked me, how could you be so sure that you desire man? And I told her, do you remember which year we started to have a television? And you were hugging me, and I was sitting in your chest, and then we were watching a Hong Kong mafia movie and criminal movie, and there was one thing that one police, I didn't remember, either a police find a bad guy or one bad guy find another bad guy and then bonded him and spanked him. That turned me on so much. And magically, my mom also remembered that. She said, that must be 1988 when you were 3 years old. So think about that. I identify it was my first porn. Yeah. Officially recognized by my mom.
Thank you. That's a great description. And yeah, I would like to open the floor for questions.